Beneath the burning sun of Egypt, where the desert sands stretch like an endless sea and the pyramids rise as eternal sentinels against the horizon, there lingers a question that has haunted scholars, wanderers, and dreamers for thousands of years, not simply who built these monuments, nor merely how they were raised with stones heavier than any human should have been able to move, but what sleeps beneath them. What silence lurks in the shadowed chambers that even the most daring explorers dare not enter, what mysteries lie sealed away by hands older than history, older perhaps than humanity itself, and though every century has carried new voices into the Valley of Giza, priests chanting prayers, invaders breaking stone, scholars unrolling papyrus, and modern archaeologists drilling, photographing, scanning, still there remains a boundary untouched, a depth unmeasured, a truth that waits like a heartbeat deep under the rock. Faint yet undeniable, and the story begins not with pharaohs, nor tomb robbers nor adventurers, but with a single fragment of forgotten writing, discovered in the 19th century in a crumbling monastery in the Sinai desert, where a monk sorting through moldy scrolls found one that seemed older than all the rest, its ink faded almost to nothing, its language strange, neither Greek nor Coptic nor Arabic but something more primal, written in symbols like spirals and suns. And at its margin in a later hand, perhaps medieval, someone had scribbled a note in Latin: "Beware the halls beneath the pyramid, for they are not tombs but prisons, not monuments but locks." This fragment passed through many hands, soldiers, collectors, scholars, until it was tucked away in the archives of a forgotten university in Europe, and there it might have remained forever had it not been for a chance discovery in 1922, when Howard Carter opened the tomb of Tutankhamun and the world's eyes turned once more to Egypt, for in that fever of discovery, a professor in Prague stumbled across the strange scroll and realized that its warning bore an uncanny resemblance to certain obscure lines from the writings of the Greek historian Herodotus, who had spoken of vast hidden chambers beneath the pyramids filled with wonders unseen by common men, though his accounts had always been dismissed as exaggeration, and yet, when compared with the fragment, the possibility arose that perhaps Herodotus had not been inventing at all, but glimpsing a truth so carefully hidden that even pharaohs feared to speak it aloud. And so the story that I will now tell you is not one of gold, nor treasure, not of curses nor simple tombs, but of what was sealed away before history began, what remains slumbering beneath the sands, and why the pyramids were not raised simply as monuments to kings but as keys, as guardians, as monuments of warning. And as we begin this journey together, you must imagine the sands blowing cold at night around the base of the Great Pyramid of Khufu, its angles sharp against the sky jeweled with stars, a structure so immense that it dwarfs all who come near. And beneath it, hidden deeper than any shaft yet mapped, lies a labyrinth where stone is not stone, where chambers stretch beyond reason, and where silence is heavier than air. For the ancients did not build without purpose, and their purpose was not death but containment, and so we must ask not what kings lie within but what kings feared, what horrors demanded such eternal guardianship. And as the wind whistles over the plateau and the Nile glitters far away, the truth begins with a sound. Faint at first, the kind of sound one might dismiss as the shifting of stone or the sigh of the earth, but those who have listened carefully, placing their ears against the rock, swear that they hear not the movements of geology but the slow, deliberate rhythm of something vast breathing, as if the pyramids themselves were lungs, inhaling, exhaling, holding back not air but something older, darker, stranger. And if you would follow me further into this mystery, know that once we step into the shadow of the stones, there is no turning back, for every answer we uncover will birth new questions, every chamber we open will lead to another door, and at the end of it all we may find that what sleeps beneath the pyramids has not been waiting for discovery at all, but for release, and the sands of time are thinning, and the locks may not hold forever, and if they break, if the sleepers wake, then history itself will not be enough to contain them. For the pyramids were never tombs, they were warnings, and their secrets still breathe beneath the stones even now, for when one lingers long enough in the shadow of Khufu's pyramid, when the tourists depart and the guides pack their lamps and the wind hushes over the plateau, a different presence fills the air, not the ordinary silence of night but a pressure, an invisible weight that presses against the chest and fills the ears with a hum too low to be sound. And it was on such a night, recorded in the journals of a certain forgotten explorer named Edmund Harrow in 1934, that the first real hint of what lies below was stumbled upon, though history has almost entirely buried his tale, for Harrow was no celebrated archaeologist but a restless wanderer. A former soldier scarred by the trenches of the Great War who had drifted from Europe to North Africa in search of something he could never name, and in Cairo he had heard whispers from Bedouin guides of a hidden shaft at the base of the pyramid, a passage sealed by stones too smooth to be natural yet never mapped by official surveys, and driven by a fever he could not quell he ventured to Giza under a moonless sky, carrying only a lantern, a notebook, and a stubborn belief that the desert itself wished to speak to him, and what he found, according to the fragments of his torn journal later recovered, was a seam in the rock no wider than his hand. But when he pressed against it the sand shifted away and the seam widened, exhaling a gust of air that smelled not of dust or age but of something damp, metallic, and faintly sweet, like blood left too long in a copper bowl, and though instinct screamed to flee he stepped inside, and the journal describes with feverish script how the stone corridor sloped downward at an impossible angle, the walls inscribed with symbols unlike hieroglyphs, spirals within spirals, eyes that opened into suns, and figures with faces blurred as though carved by a trembling hand. And deeper still he heard it, the sound, faint but rhythmic, the breathing that locals had whispered of, echoing through the stone like the heartbeat of the pyramid itself, and Harrow's account breaks there, replaced by erratic sketches of figures half human, half serpent, of chambers filled with dark water, of doors that were not doors but veils of light, and the final page, smeared with ink and perhaps blood, bears only the words, "Not tombs. Not kings. Prisoners." The journal was discovered years later, water-damaged, in a Cairo market stall, purchased by a British tourist who passed it along to a university, where it languished in obscurity until a young Egyptologist stumbled upon it decades later and recognized that the passage Harrow described could not match any known shaft or chamber in Khufu's pyramid, and yet the drawings hinted at something real. For within them were details no outsider could have fabricated, an exact curvature of the descending passageway that modern scans would later confirm, carvings and locations no tourist had seen, and most chilling of all, references to underground water channels directly beneath the plateau, a fact not widely known until the mid-20th century, and so Harrow, dismissed as a madman in his lifetime, may have glimpsed a truth that has remained buried, and if his words were true then the Great Pyramid, like its sisters, was not raised merely to reach heaven but to anchor something far below earth. Something so dangerous the ancients labored for generations to seal it away, and to understand this we must look not at Egypt alone but at the web of myths that span civilizations, for in every corner of the ancient world there are tales of beings sealed beneath the earth, titans chained in Tartarus, Rakshasas bound beneath temples in India, demons imprisoned under mountains in Mesopotamian legend, and serpents sleeping beneath the foundations of cities in Norse and Celtic myth. And though scholars treat these as separate, imaginative traditions, what if they are fragments of a single memory, distorted but shared, of an age when something older than mankind walked this world, and mankind's earliest empires rose not to worship but to contain? And if that is so, then the pyramids are not Egypt's alone but part of a global lattice of prisons, their alignments to stars not only symbolic but functional, as though the heavens themselves were keys, and the sands of Giza conceal not only chambers but an entire mechanism of containment, a machine of stone and geometry built to hold back the breath of something vast, and perhaps even now its strength wanes, for in the last century reports have grown stranger, electrical instruments near the pyramids failing without cause, seismographs detecting faint tremors beneath the plateau with no corresponding earthquakes. And the breathing beneath the stones is no longer content to sleep, for the hum that once whispered like a hidden current in the rock began, in the testimonies of wanderers, explorers, and madmen, to grow louder with each passing decade, like a tide that could no longer be ignored, and those scholars dismissed the murmurs as superstition or tricks of the desert wind. There remained those who knew that sound is never merely sound in places touched by antiquity, that vibration carries memory, and memory carries truth, and the truth beneath Giza was stirring, restless as a sleeper who turns uneasily upon their bed, disturbed not by time itself but by intrusion, by the restless scratching of mankind's ceaseless hunger to pry open every sealed door, and thus the pyramids, those eternal sentinels, no longer stood in solemn silence but in strained resistance, as guardians pressed to the limits of endurance. Their angles still sharp against the stars but their foundations trembling with echoes of something vaster than stone. And the proof of this came not in the open proclamations of archaeologists but in the secret records hidden in university archives, reports never published, hushed away by governments, that spoke of instruments lowered into boreholes near Khufu's pyramid returning readings that could not be reconciled with geology, of magnetic fields pulsing in rhythmic waves like a heartbeat, of vibrations beneath the plateau that mapped not as solid rock but as hollow chambers so vast they defied engineering. And though such findings were buried beneath bureaucracy, a few fragments leaked, surfacing in whispered articles and the fevered discussions of fringe scholars, who spoke of caverns stretching like arteries far beneath Giza, interwoven not by accident but by design. As though the very earth had been carved into a labyrinth meant not to guide intruders inward but to keep something from pushing outward. And within these discussions rose again the figure of Edmund Harrow, his journal re-examined by younger minds who realized that his sketches of spiral symbols matched carvings found not only in forgotten Egyptian ruins but in prehistoric sites across the world, in Malta's hypogeum, in the serpent mounds of North America, in the stones of Göbekli Tepe, symbols that spoke of a shared knowledge spanning continents. A warning encoded in the universal language of spirals and eyes and suns, and what Harrow had called prisoners, began to align with a chilling hypothesis that mankind itself had not been the first sovereign of Earth, that before the age of pyramids and temples and cities there had been another dominion, a reign of beings whose forms were so strange the earliest carvers could only blur their faces in trembling stone, and though myths across cultures clothed them in different names, Titans, Nephilim, Naga, Jinn, the essence was the same. Vast intelligences that walked the earth until men, in terror and desperation, bound them. Beneath mountains, deserts, seas, and pyramids. And now, as our century digs with arrogance, those bindings loosen, and the breathing grows bold, and here lies the crux of what scholars dare not admit, that the pyramids were never merely tombs or monuments but locks in a global chain, their alignments with Orion and Sirius not only religious but functional. Tuning forks resonating with the heavens to suppress vibrations rising from below, celestial keystones anchoring terrestrial prisons, and yet what happens when the stars shift? When precession tilts the heavens, when time itself alters the sky, and the locks fall out of alignment, weakening the net that has held for millennia. And perhaps that is why in recent decades the hum has grown louder, why seismic maps reveal unexplainable voids, why locals whisper of shadows stretching unnaturally long beneath the moonlight. And if you think this only fantasy, then let us return to the testimony of explorers, for in 1957 a French engineer, named Alain Brousseau, conducting unofficial surveys of Giza with ground-penetrating radar, reported in a private letter to a colleague, a letter preserved in the Bibliothèque Nationale but never published, that his instruments detected a pulse beneath the plateau, a signal oscillating at intervals of 12 minutes, too regular to be natural, like breath or a machine. And though his colleague urged him to publish, Brousseau refused, insisting in a final note that to speak openly is to invite madness, for the sands themselves seem to listen, and I fear they do not forgive. And weeks later he vanished, his equipment abandoned, his body never found, swallowed by the desert or perhaps by something deeper. And this silence became its own evidence, for those who look closely at the history of pyramid exploration find not only discoveries but disappearances, not only triumphs but tragedies, expeditions that began with fanfare and ended in inexplicable collapse, men who descended into shafts never to emerge, entire projects abandoned without explanation, their files sealed by governments. And in the gaps of these absences one sees the outline of a truth too vast for official history to permit. And so the story circles back to us, here and now, for the breathing beneath the stones has not ceased, it has only grown stronger, more insistent, as though sensing that the locks grow weak, as though stirring in anticipation of release. And the question that presses upon us is no longer whether something sleeps beneath the pyramids but what will happen when it wakes. And if indeed it is waking already, then what we call history may soon be devoured by a presence older than language, older than man. And perhaps that is why the ancients labored with stones heavier than logic permits, why they aligned their monuments with stars and rivers and cardinal points, why they poured generations into construction not of beauty but of necessity, for they knew what we have forgotten, that beneath the desert lies not only the past but the future, coiled and waiting, and its breath is growing deeper, louder, closer, until one night the hum will no longer be mistaken for wind but recognized for what it is, the sound of a prisoner testing the strength of its chains, and if those chains break, then all the sands of Egypt, all the monuments of man, may prove nothing but dust before the awakening of what has slept too long, and thus the breathing beneath the stones is not content to sleep, it is preparing to rise. Though rise is too simple a word for what is happening beneath the sands of Giza, for what Harrow glimpsed in broken sketches and what Brusseau felt pulsing in the stone was not a thing with limbs ready to stand but a force vast enough to bend the very architecture of the earth, something that does not wake as men wake but that swells, surges, and fills the voids around it until stone trembles and the air itself grows thick with memory, and those who have stood too near to the base of Khufu's pyramid at midnight swear that they felt time ripple, as though the stars flickered in patterns not seen since the dawn of ages, and those scientists scoff, insisting such accounts are mere illusions born of exhaustion or desert winds. The consistency of these reports cannot be ignored, for always the descriptions align, the hum deepening, the sense of unseen eyes, the feeling that the pyramid is less a monument, and more a lid pressing down against something struggling to push upward, and this pressure has left its traces not only in the testimony of wanderers but in the hidden records of Egypt itself, in papyri not displayed in museums, but locked away in the vaults of antiquities authorities, texts that describe in veiled metaphors the keepers of breath, and the silent watchers of the underdeep. References that Egyptologists dismiss as religious allegory but which, when read alongside Harrow's frantic warnings, reveal something older and darker, for they speak of the Zep-Tepi, the first time, that shadowy era before the pharaohs when gods walked among men. But what if those gods were not benevolent rulers of myth but captives whose prisons were maintained through ritual and geometry, and the builders of the pyramids, far from worshipping them, feared them, binding them beneath the stone while cloaking their terror in the language of devotion? And here lies the genius of the ancients. They hid warnings inside hymns, they veiled locks inside temples, they taught generations to repeat rituals without ever admitting what failure would mean, for to speak plainly of the sleepers was to invite madness. And yet still fragments slip through, fragments that whisper of beings not of this earth, or at least not bound to it as we are, beings whose breath could stir deserts into seas, whose eyes could sear the sky, whose voices were said to be louder than thunder yet now lie buried in silence, a silence that grows thinner with each generation until now we hear the hum not only in the sand but in the machines we build, in the failing instruments, in the crackling static of radios near the plateau, as though the prisoners are reaching upward through every channel they can. And perhaps this explains the strange magnetism of Giza, why generation after generation is drawn to it, why conquerors, priests, scientists, and wanderers alike cannot resist standing in its shadow. For whether they know it or not they are listening, drawn like moths to the vibration of wings that have not yet unfurled, and even now there are whispers among the Bedouins of dreams that spread like sickness, dreams of vast waters beneath the earth, of eyes opening in the dark, of serpents coiling not in caves but in chambers of stone lit by no sun, and the elders say these are not dreams but warnings, echoes of what stirs below. And if this is true then humanity stands on the edge of a precipice, for the pyramids may not hold forever, their alignment to Orion and Sirius already drifting as the heavens shift, the resonance of their geometry weakening as the stars move away from the ancient locks. And if those locks fail then what was sealed will rise not as myth but as reality, and all the stories of titans and giants and demons will be revealed not as imagination but as memory. For memory is what stone carries, and the stone of Giza has held its memory longer than we dare reckon, pulsing it now like a beacon, warning us, reminding us, preparing us. And if you ask what form this rising will take, do not imagine merely a beast clawing upward through sand, for it may rise not in body but in influence, a thought seeping into dreams, a vibration infecting machines, a pressure bending history, until suddenly nations find themselves in conflict, men turn against men, rivers shift, skies darken. And we call it war or climate or chance, but in truth it is the breath of the sleepers spilling upward, reshaping the world to prepare for their return. And perhaps that return is not of creatures but of dominion, the restoration of an order before man, when the world belonged to intelligences we cannot comprehend. And so the question is not whether we can stop them but whether we were ever meant to, for perhaps mankind itself was shaped as warden, its civilization seated not to flourish endlessly but to serve as keepers of locks. And if that is true then our Failure is not merely an end but a reset, a closing of the brief chapter called history before something older reclaims its throne. And still the hum deepens, still the breath pushes, still the pyramids strain. And we, blind in our arrogance, continue drilling, mapping, intruding, pressing against the very seals our ancestors swore never to disturb, and soon, very soon, the sands will answer. And what rises will not be content to sleep again, for sleep implies a return to silence, a retreat into forgetfulness, yet the thing beneath Giza has been forgotten too long, buried not only under stone but under the weight of human denial, smothered in myths and allegories until its reality became a ghost of memory. And now as the bindings weaken and the geometry falters, it does not return as one might imagine a prisoner released, but as a tide reclaiming shores, as a storm reclaiming the sky. Its essence diffusing through the cracks of history and reality itself, so that we first glimpse its awakening not in monstrous form but in subtle shifts, in the unnerving patterns that have begun to grip the world like a fever. For even now scientists whisper of anomalies that cannot be dismissed. Migratory birds veering from ancient routes, whales beaching in vast numbers, compasses stuttering at the edges of the magnetic equator, auroras flickering in latitudes that should never know such lights, yet each phenomenon, though catalogued separately, points to a single truth: the planet itself trembles under a new rhythm, a pulse out of sync with the solar winds, a pulse that matches the oscillations once detected beneath Giza. And this is no coincidence, for the Earth's own magnetic field is a veil, a skin stretched taut across the wounds of antiquity. And as it weakens, as it is weakening now, the sleepers press upward with greater force, and those attuned to old knowledge feel it most keenly. The Bedouins in their dreams, the monks in their cloisters, the shamans who drum in distant jungles, all reporting visions of great chambers opening, of rivers beneath deserts boiling with phosphorescent glow, of voices too vast to belong to men, speaking in tones that shake bone and memory alike. And though governments dismiss such accounts as superstition, it is no accident that they send their satellites to scan Giza from orbit. No accident that files marked with the highest secrecy classifications carry words like geothermal surge, unmapped cavity, seismic resonance, and unknown source. For they too know, or at least suspect, that what lies beneath is no longer sleeping, and in their fear they attempt to contain it not with ritual as the ancients did but with machinery, lowering drills and instruments, releasing waves of sonar and radiation into the earth, as though technology can suppress what once required the stars themselves to bind. And in this arrogance they accelerate the unraveling, for vibration meets vibration. Energy stirs energy, and the sleepers take each intrusion as an invitation, pushing back with greater intensity. And so it is that we find reports of archaeologists collapsing without cause in the shadow of Khufu's pyramid, of soldiers stationed nearby hearing voices in the sand calling their names in forgotten tongues, of tourists who wander off and are later found miles away, dazed, their eyes wide as though they had stared too long into the sun. Whispering of corridors they walked in dream, but swearing those corridors were real, carved with spirals, lit by a glow with no flame, and always, always, the same refrain, the sense of being watched from below, the certainty that the stone itself is breathing. And if we follow these threads back we see they form a pattern, a net of warnings stretching across centuries, for was it not Herodotus who spoke of vast chambers beneath the pyramids, flooded with black waters? Was it not Pliny who recorded tales of priests who feared the voice in the stone? Was it not even Napoleon, when he camped with his soldiers at Giza, who confessed to having visions inside the king's chambers so intense that he refused ever to describe them? These fragments, scattered like shards, align with precision when seen through the lens of awakening, and together they whisper of a truth too immense for the official histories to allow, yet impossible to deny. The pyramids are not tombs, not monuments, not mysteries of engineering alone, but machines of containment, their stones angled to catch the song of the stars. Their shafts aligned not for the dead but for the living locks that held the breath of the underdeep, and now that alignment drifts, the locks weaken, the hum grows, and soon the rising will become not subtle but manifest, for already signs spill outward in ways no skeptic can dismiss forever. Storms gathering with unnatural ferocity, earthquakes rattling regions long dormant, seas warming from below as if some furnace stirs beneath the crust, and in each of these events is the echo of what comes, not disaster alone but preparation. As though the world is adjusting itself for the return of its first sovereigns, and so we must ask, If they rise, will they rise as they once were, forms too vast and alien for men to look upon, or will they rise through us, seeding dreams, bending minds, whispering into the councils of nations until humanity itself becomes the vessel of their dominion? And perhaps this has already begun, for why do leaders across the world speak now in tones of fear and division? Why do wars ignite with the speed of fire and dry grass? Why do men turn against one another, as though driven by a will not their own? And why does it feel as though time itself accelerates, centuries of change compressed into decades, decades into years, as if history is no longer ours but the unfolding of a design written long before the first pyramid stone was laid? And so I tell you again, what rises will not be content to sleep again, for sleep belongs to the defeated, and what breathes beneath the sands has never been defeated, only bound. And bindings are not eternal, and when they fail, as they are failing now, the age of man will be revealed for what it always was, an interlude, a pause, a fragile silence between dominions, soon to be shattered by the sound of chains breaking beneath the earth. And when that sound comes, it will not echo through deserts alone but through every city, every shore, every mind, and the world will remember what it was never meant to forget, that we were never the first, and perhaps we will not be the last. For memory is not linear, not a straight thread of beginnings and ends, but a spiral, a coil tightening and loosening through ages. And the things bound beneath Giza are the knots in that spiral, the points where time itself was forced to fracture and fold to contain them. And as the spiral unwinds once more, the fracture lines begin to glow, not visibly to the eye but through the soul of the planet. And all across the earth signs bloom like bruises upon flesh, volcanoes awakening in clusters as though answering a call, tectonic plates grinding with a hunger no seismologist can model, ancient fault lines trembling where no pressure should exist, and in the midst of this planetary shiver the human world too trembles, though we dress it in the language of politics, markets, and wars, unaware that what we call chaos is but resonance, the echo of a deeper upheaval rising from below. And if you stand long enough in the shadow of the Great Pyramid at midnight, you will feel it in your bones. The same pulse felt by Harrow in his fevered sketches, the same hum that Brissot heard when he pressed his ear against the cool stone, a hum that now spreads outward like veins of fire, touching those sensitive enough to dream beyond themselves, and they dream not of gods or demons but of corridors that stretch beyond geometry, chambers wider than mountains, rivers that glow with their own inner sun, and always, always, the watchers. Forms vast and shadowed, their eyes unblinking in their breath heavy with eons, and those dreamers wake with tears upon their faces and blood at their noses, whispering words in languages never learned, and when doctors record the sounds they find no origin, no etymology, only patterns that match the resonance detected by instruments buried beneath the sands of Giza. And so we must understand, the sleepers are not only stirring in stone but in mind. For containment was always double, geometry without and obedience within, rituals performed by the living to mirror the angles of the dead, and it is this obedience that has failed, for mankind no longer chants beneath the stars, no longer tends to the sacred measures of alignment, no longer remembers the purpose of its own existence, and thus the locks have faltered, and thus the sleepers rise, and governments, blind in their pride, send deeper drills, convinced that by mapping the secrets they can control them. Lowering machines into shafts never meant for metal, pouring vibrations into voids never meant to be touched, and the result is what you might expect, blackouts spreading across Cairo when instruments hum too close to forbidden frequencies, satellites failing in orbit when their paths cross the vertical shadow of the pyramid at solstice, and even whispers from the few who dare descend into the unexplored chambers detected by muon scans, men who return pale and wordless, who quit their posts and vanish into obscurity, leaving only cryptic messages scrawled on walls. Spiral's eyes, a single phrase repeated. They are breathing again. And what is breath but life? What is breath but dominion? For the ancients knew breath was power, that to inhale and exhale was not merely to live but to shape reality. And so they named the prisoners keepers of breath. For their very respiration could reorder the elements, and if they rise fully, then the air itself will cease to belong to us. Our lungs will not serve our will but theirs, and perhaps this is already beginning, for why else do people across continents complain of sudden suffocations, of nights where no air seems enough, of dreams where they drown not in water but in heavy air thick with unseen pressure, and why else does the weather spiral so violently, storms coiling tighter, air currents shifting, as though the very atmosphere is being pulled by an ancient rhythm, reconfigured to suit the lungs of something else. Something that has waited too long to breathe, and if you think this is mere poetry, remember that the pyramids themselves breathe, their stones expanding and contracting with heat and cold, their chambers pulsing with the pressure of desert wind, and it is said that if one listens at dawn, when the stars fade and the sun has not yet risen, one can hear the pyramid sigh, not with the breath of stone but with the echo of what it holds, and the ancients recorded this too, though they cloaked it in ritual. Speaking of the pyramid as a living being, a body whose bones are granite, whose veins are shafts, whose breath sustains the world, and now that body shudders, now that breath deepens, now the bones of stone begin to crack beneath the strain, and cracks in stone are cracks in time, for these monuments were bound to the heavens, aligned with Orion and Sirius to fix the locks in place, but the stars have drifted, the skies have changed, the geometry falters, and the locks cannot hold forever. And so the question becomes not when but how, not if but in what form. For the sleepers may not rise as beasts or titans but as thought itself, thought that infiltrates dreams, bends governments, turns one man against another until humanity prepares its own ruin as offering, and perhaps that is their true rising, not the breaking of stone but the breaking of will, not chains shattering in the earth but minds unraveling in the streets, and if this is so then it has already begun. For across the world uprisings ignite without cause, leaders speak with voices that tremble as though guided by unseen prompters, scientists abandon reason to chase fragments of visions, and nations turn their weapons inward, all while the hum beneath Giza deepens, all while the pyramids strain against their own design, all while the world inches closer to remembering what it was never meant to forget, that we were never the first, and perhaps we will not be the last, and if that is so, then who, or what, waits to claim the silence that comes after us? For silence itself is not void but possession, not absence but the prelude of a voice older than the alphabet of man, a voice that once ruled this world before time was carved into calendars and myths, a voice that trembles now beneath the sands of Giza with the slow insistence of a heart learning again to beat, and in that heartbeat lies the unraveling of all we know. For what we call civilization is but a thin scaffolding built over abysses, a lattice of stories and symbols stretched across gulfs we refuse to look into, yet the sleepers, as the ancients named them, have never forgotten, never ceased their breathing in the stone dark, never ceased pressing against the locks of geometry and ritual, and now as those locks falter, what stirs is not simply power but memory itself, memory buried in the marrow of humanity, in the fragments of dream and myth we carry without knowing why. Memory of a time when the sky did not look as it does now, when constellations were different and men lived not as masters but as witnesses, when the pyramids were not monuments to kings but engines binding the breath of the underdeep, and the priests of that forgotten aeon tended them with terror rather than pride, chanting beneath the stars, marking alignments with trembling hands, for they knew what we have forgotten, that stone can sing, that breath can bind, that geometry is not abstraction but weapon, and that once the song falters the sleepers rise not in flesh alone but in the trembling of the world, and so it begins now in fragments too small to connect unless you have eyes unclouded by the comfort of reason, for the reports scatter like sparks across the map of the world, auroras burning green and violet over cities near the equator, deep-sea cables severed by currents that move against the known laws of tide, birds wheeling into the sea as if driven by magnetic compulsions, children drawing spirals and eyes they cannot explain, their mouths whispering in sleep words their parents swear are not human. And in Cairo itself the air feels thicker, as though each breath carries weight, as though invisible hands press upon the chest, and those who sleep near Giza wake drenched in sweat, hearing whispers in the stone, voices that call them by name with accents not of any tongue spoken today, voices so heavy with age they bend the dreamer's will until waking feels less real than the call of the abyss. And scientists dispatched to measure anomalies return changed, their instruments humming with readings that flicker between data and static as though the earth itself resists quantification, and one by one the teams vanish into silence, their names redacted in reports, their families told nothing, but rumors spread in hidden corners of the net of men whose eyes have turned black, whose veins glow faintly beneath the skin when struck by light, who do not sleep but stare at walls for hours as if listening to instructions beyond hearing, and in the shadow of the Great Pyramid strange lights have been seen, pale columns rising from cracks in the stone at night, vanishing with the dawn, witnessed by Bedouins who refuse now to pass near the plateau, saying the desert has grown restless, saying the sand itself moves as though alive, swallowing camps in moments, reshaping dunes into spirals no wind could carve, and still the governments deny, still the archaeologists speak of natural phenomena, still the military patrols the site with increasing desperation, their radios crackling with whispers that repeat orders before they are spoken, their weapons jamming in unison as if the metal refuses obedience, and all the while the hum deepens, felt now not only beneath the feet of those who stand at Giza but across the world, a low vibration that rattles glass in cities far removed, that unsettles dogs and cattle, that leaves infants screaming at the ceiling as if seeing something invisible and vast. And priests in monasteries far from Egypt wake in the night with blood at their ears, muttering prayers that crumble into silence, their faith splintering as dreams of vast corridors flood their minds, corridors where rivers of fire flow and voices chant in unison, not in worship but in hunger, and what they chant is no name we know but a rhythm. A pattern of sound that matches the pulse of earthquakes now recorded from the Andes to the Himalayas, a rhythm no tectonic plate could produce, a rhythm older than the crust of the earth, and in the deserts of Giza the sands glow faintly at night, phosphorescent veins threading outward from the pyramid as though the earth's own blood is lighting up, and the more the governments seek to contain it the faster it spreads, for each drill, each satellite, each intrusion of sonar is a note in the wrong key, a dissonance that shakes the locks loose, and so the rising accelerates, and so humanity, blind and arrogant, hastens its own undoing, and already whispers leak through the veil of secrecy. Whispers of soldiers who deserted rather than remain near the plateau, soldiers who claimed they saw figures moving inside the pyramid where no one was stationed, figures tall and thin, their outlines blurred as though seen through water, their faces hidden but their eyes burning white in the dark, and those soldiers now hide in villages, raving that stone has learned to walk, that the walls of the pyramid are no longer walls but flesh hardening and softening as though the pyramid itself is a chrysalis about to crack. And if this is true, then what rises will not be confined to one shape, one form, but many, for the ancients spoke not of one sleeper but of a host, each bound in a chamber of resonance, each breathing in rhythms that together formed the hum of the earth. And if even one is unbound the harmony collapses, and the world we know, the air, the water, the fire within the core, will belong not to us but to them, and yet perhaps it already does, for why else do men of power move like puppets? Why else do nations unravel into chaos? Why else does the sky itself burn with strange fire, if not because the rising has already begun, if not because the silence after us is already claimed, and the question that lingers now is not when, not how, but whether mankind will recognize the truth in time to kneel or whether we will resist until we shatter like stone against the tide, and in either case, the sleepers will rise, the breath will return, the spiral will close, and the silence we thought our own will echo only with voices too vast for men to endure. For the world itself has become a vessel for the stirrings beneath the sands, each continent resonating with a low-frequency vibration that carries not only through rock and water but through the very consciousness of those who dwell upon it, and those who are sensitive to such shifts, dreamers, prophets, children who see spirals in their sleep, monks who have kept the old chants alive in hidden monasteries, sailors who sense currents that should not exist, feel the pulse as a presence, a tidal movement in the unseen oceans of existence, a force that presses upward with a weight beyond comprehension, and as the pyramid hums, as its chambers swell with resonance, the locks designed by men and gods alike begin to fracture, sending ripples along the lattice of secret containment that stretches across deserts, mountains, and oceans for the sleepers beneath. Khufu are not isolated but part of a network, a system of bindings that once held the dominion of entities that predated humanity itself, and as one awakens even partially, the others stir, their dreams colliding with the waking world, their breaths manifesting as anomalies in climate, in geomagnetic fields, in the currents of rivers and the migrations of birds, so that the planet itself seems to gasp, to shudder in recognition of the liberation that is already underway, and humanity, oblivious, mistakes these tremors for earthquakes, for storms, for the caprice of nature, failing to recognize that every tremor, every pulse, every inexplicable light in the sky is a prelude to the rising, a warning written in the language of existence itself, and those who approach Giza at night feel this most acutely, the ground vibrating beneath their feet, the air thick with anticipation. the stars flickering as if the heavens themselves are anxious observers, and the pyramids, these colossal engines of containment, strain against the surge, their joints creaking, stones shifting imperceptibly yet inexorably, as though the earth beneath them has become elastic, a medium through which the ancient prisoners push and press, sending waves that reach across deserts and continents. And in every city near and far there are reports that defy reason, dogs howling in unison with no cause, birds falling mid-flight, people losing consciousness for moments that feel like years, machines failing when aligned with certain meridians, electrical grids fluctuating in rhythm with the pulse beneath, as though the sleeper's breath itself has begun to permeate the human-made world, infiltrating technology, infrastructure, even consciousness, for dreams are now shared, night visions overlapping, and those who sleep in Cairo, London, Tokyo, Buenos Aires, and New York report corridors of light and shadow, of rivers that glow like molten silver, of faces that are neither human nor animal but a shifting amalgam of eyes and mouths and scales, and in these dreams the sleepers speak, though not in words but in vibrations, tones felt in the bones, pulses that reverberate in the heart, instructing, demanding, warning, and the children, those sensitive vessels, begin to respond, sketching symbols and spirals and stars, murmuring syllables that match the rhythm of the hum, and adults who witness them feel a pull in the chest. A compulsion to obey, to prepare, though none can say for what, for the instructions are encoded not in language but in resonance, in memory reactivated across generations, a memory mankind does not consciously hold, yet cannot ignore, and the pyramids themselves become active nodes in a planetary circuit, amplifying the vibrations, channeling them through chambers hidden for millennia, shafts that twist in geometries beyond Euclidean comprehension. Water that pools in dark basins reflecting not the light above but stars that no human eyes have seen, for the architects of the pyramids knew not only stone and mathematics but the physics of life and memory, the subtle interplay of energy that could bind consciousness itself, and now that energy, disturbed by the intrusions of modernity, by satellites, scanners, tourists, excavations, feeds the stirrings, accelerating the awakening, and the air above the plateau grows heavy, charged with ions and with expectation, so that those who inhale it feel visions without sleep, voices without sound, and pressure without touch, and across the desert the sand moves in currents impossible to wind alone, forming spirals that mirror the symbols of the chambers below, signaling to those who can read them, and as the hum grows into a roar, faint yet undeniable even to the untrained ear, the sleepers push harder, and the fractures in the locks propagate like a lattice breaking under tension, sending resonance lines outward that cross oceans, that twist magnetic poles, that disrupt currents, and already governments notice, already satellites record anomalies, already scientists feel inexplicable dread when scanning the plateau, and yet the official story is silence, for to acknowledge even a hint of the truth would be to invite panic, to reveal that humanity is merely the caretaker of a prison for forces it was never meant to understand, and as the sleepers stir, their awareness extends beyond stone and earth, reaching into minds tuned to the rhythm, connecting dreamers and sensitive souls into a network of perception, so that what was once isolated in Giza now resonates across the globe, a choir of consciousness that hums with the voices of those long trapped, and in their murmuring is both command and invitation, calling forth the children, the dreamers, the prophets, guiding them to align, to prepare, to act as agents of the underdeep in a world that cannot yet comprehend them. And in that rising there is no hurry, for these beings perceive time differently, their scale not measured in hours or centuries but in millennia and the folding of aeons, and yet, despite their patience, the strain in the locks has created tremors too strong to remain unnoticed, and the first manifestations of their will are subtle but terrifying, rivers shifting against their channels, deserts exhaling clouds of dust that form shapes resembling the sleepers themselves, auroras at latitudes impossible, compasses spinning wildly, animals fleeing in patterns that mimic corridors of the unseen underworld, and humans, especially the sensitive, feeling involuntary tugs on their will, compelling them to certain acts, certain pilgrimages, certain rites forgotten by history but remembered in bone, in instinct, in resonance. And as this unfolds, the Great Pyramid no longer stands merely as a monument but as a conductor, a lens through which the sleeper's consciousness presses into the waking world. And those who approach it now report hearing words in silence, a kind of tonal communication that bypasses the ears entirely, passing directly into thought, shaping belief, rewriting perception, and the more humans intrude, through drilling, scanning, or even through mental attempts to grasp the scale of what lies beneath, the stronger the push becomes, the faster the locks fail, the hum grows into a song, and that song is not harmonious but fractal, composed of overlapping frequencies too vast to comprehend, too precise to be random. And in its patterns are instructions and memories and warnings, all coiled into rhythms that warp reality slightly with each pulse, shifting probabilities, bending chance, reshaping outcomes in subtle ways that accumulate until the world itself seems to tremble with anticipation. And in these tremors are glimpses of what is to come, cities appearing in visions as ruins before their time, landscapes folding into themselves as if rehearsing a collapse, skies opening to colors unseen by the human eye, constellations rearranging themselves subtly, and humans noticing anomalies without understanding why, acting as though compelled by forces beyond their own consciousness. And even in the night, in the sleeping hours, dreams intersect with reality, as if the veil between waking and dreaming thins, revealing corridors, chambers, rivers, and beings whose size and intent no human can comprehend. And all the while the sleepers breathe, their breath now a tidal force, there will now a current. And the world, the deserts, the oceans, the mountains, the skies, the cities, the minds of men, is caught in that current, swept along unknowingly, and those who study these phenomena can only record what they see, feel, and measure, knowing full well that the instruments only hint at the full scale, that human perception is too narrow, too brief, too limited to contain the knowledge of the underdeep. And as the days pass, the hum grows louder still, radiating not only from Giza but from alignments worldwide, as though the pyramid's ancient lattice of containment is resonating in sympathy, creating a global symphony of awakening, a chorus that will not be silent, a voice that will not be ignored. And in the wake of this rising, every human action, every decision, every belief will be touched, bent, reshaped, for the sleepers are no longer content with the shadows beneath the stones, they reach through memory, through thought, through the very flow of history itself, and those attuned feel the pull, the beckoning, the inevitability of what comes, and what comes is not merely stone breaking or walls trembling or monsters clawing into the light, but the awakening of consciousness itself, ancient, alien, infinite, and humanity, for all its knowledge, for all its arrogance, stands only as a witness to the slow, inexorable unfurling of what has waited beyond time, beneath the sands, behind locks older than kings, and as the spiral of awakening tightens, as resonance spreads across earth and sky, the world itself leans into the pulse, the global lattice hums in response, and every being sensitive to it trembles, every instrument records anomalies, every dreamer dreams the same impossible corridors, the same impossible chambers, the same impossible presence, and in that shared vision lies the inevitability. The sleepers are rising, their breath is shaping reality. The pyramids are no longer inert, the locks falter, and the silence that comes after us will belong to them alone, and humanity will awaken only to understand the scope of what it has allowed to stir, for it is not merely stone and sand that will command the world, but the memory, the will, the breath, the consciousness, of what has slept for uncounted millennia, and the song of the underdeep spreads now, unstoppable, as the watchers beneath Giza press against their prison, and the entire world shivers in anticipation of the moment when all boundaries will fail, all locks will break, and the ancient voices will claim the earth once more. And in their claiming, all distinctions between past, present, and future begin to blur, for time itself is no longer a straight line but a network of coils and spirals through which the consciousness of the sleepers presses, folding moments upon moments, so that an hour in Cairo might stretch to a year in Tokyo, and a second on the plateau might carry the weight of centuries elsewhere. And in this temporal distortion the human mind struggles to reconcile perception with reality, for dreams leak into waking hours and waking hours bleed into dreams, and those attuned to the pulse, children whose minds have never been constrained by skepticism, prophets who have whispered into the winds since before the pyramids were completed, engineers who feel the hum in their bones as vibrations they cannot measure, soldiers stationed near the plateau who have abandoned their posts because obedience has become unbearable, begin to perceive the architecture of the rising not as stone and void but as consciousness, as intelligence, as thought pressing outward, reshaping the lattice of the world to accommodate beings whose scale and cognition exceed comprehension, and the earth itself becomes an instrument, its crust bending and flexing, its oceans swelling in currents that defy known physics, its atmosphere thickening with ions that respond to the rhythm of what lies beneath. And the continents themselves seem to lean toward Giza as if the landmass remembers, if not consciously, then instinctually, the eons in which it was shaped and restrained, bound into a framework of containment whose geometry was mirrored in the heavens, in Orion, in Sirius, in patterns so precise that even millennia of shifting stars cannot erase the trace entirely, yet the trace falters now, the alignment drifts, and the energy once channeled through precise angles into the stones of the pyramids surges into the world, spilling out in whispers and tremors, in visions and compulsions, and the population of the globe, largely unaware, begins to feel it in ways they cannot articulate, from sudden vertigo to inexplicable euphoria, from shared dreams of impossible chambers to an obsessive need to walk in spirals or repeat sequences of numbers, letters, or motions that correspond, unknowingly, to the harmonic frequencies of the sleeper's lattice, and as these harmonics accumulate across continents, they coalesce into resonance patterns that activate latent nodes buried in geology, in rivers, in mountain ranges, in volcanic fields, and in each node a fragment of the imprisoned consciousness awakens, not fully yet, but enough to touch the world, to make it quiver, to force the minds of men to twist with suggestions they cannot resist, compelling leaders, inventors, scholars, and mystics alike to follow paths dictated by the pulse, and even those who are ignorant, who see nothing and hear nothing, feel a subtle tug in the direction of the rising, a subtle compulsion that manifests as coincidence, as fate, as sudden insight or dread, and nowhere is this more pronounced than in Giza itself, where the stones of the pyramids shiver, where the chambers inhale and exhale with a pressure no human lungs can match, where the grand gallery hums with the resonance of air molecules vibrating in synchrony with the hidden consciousness below, where the king's chamber becomes less a room than a conduit, less a tomb than a throat, and the sarcophagus of Khufu, long believed empty, contains the residual echo of something vast and vigilant, a seed of memory that pulses like a second heartbeat, echoing outward through corridors that twist and expand beyond physical comprehension, chambers that appear to have dimensions only perceivable by the mind's eye, filled with spiraling symbols and unearthly geometries, and anyone who enters and perceives them, even partially, suffers a profound rearrangement of thought, for understanding these spaces is not merely observation, but assimilation, and the mind cannot bear to integrate such knowledge without fracturing, so that those who try either go mad or are compelled to leave the site, often speaking in tongues or producing sketches that resemble maps, schematics, or musical notation that encode instructions for the next phase of rising, and beyond the plateau, the pattern spreads, so that rivers change their courses. Subterranean aquifers surge with mineralized energy, the planet's magnetic field quivers in response, migratory species deviate from ancestral routes, and humans begin to notice anomalies in their cognition and behavior, subtle at first, a compulsion to repeat patterns, obsessive fascination with spirals, sudden urges to journey to sacred or ancient sites, compulsive recollection of myths not previously known, flashes of memory that do not belong to the self. As though the consciousness of the sleeper seeps through the lattice, and as the lattice expands, the frequency of contact increases, until networks of sensitive minds across the globe begin to experience synchronized events, shared dreams of impossible corridors, chambers lit from sources unseen, rivers flowing in impossible loops, voices and tones so low they are felt in bone and chest, and these voices convey not words but intention, direction, understanding, a pull towards certain actions, decisions, alignments, all of which serve to accelerate the full awakening, and simultaneously, the physical world responds. Faults long dormant creak and groan, volcanoes belch clouds and patterns that mimic the symbols of the chambers, auroras flare unexpectedly at latitudes that defy solar activity. Oceans swell and recede in pulses unrelated to tides, deserts exhale sand in forms that trace spiral geometries that match those of the ancient bindings, and animals behave in ways that suggest recognition, avoidance, or worship of invisible presences, while humans interpret these events through religion, superstition, science, or denial, rarely comprehending the true cause, and as the locks continue to weaken, the resonance grows, eventually becoming audible to those near enough to feel the pressure in their chest, to hear the song in their bones, a sound that is not music but communication, and that communication is multisensory, bypassing conventional perception to reach directly into consciousness, instructing, warning, commanding, and compelling, so that communities unknowingly participate in the preparation of the world for the full emergence of the sleepers, whose essence is no longer bound to flesh alone but is becoming a planetary force, capable of shaping not only geography but cognition, physics, and reality itself. And as the Great Pyramid reaches the limits of its structural endurance, the fractures in its stone propagate outward into the earth, connecting with hidden nodes worldwide, and the sleeper's breath becomes a current that courses through all, visible only in the effects it produces, measurable only in the subtle but relentless alignment of events toward a singular purpose. A harmonization of the world to the rhythms of those who once ruled before man, and as this convergence accelerates, humanity's perception frays at the edges, producing waves of hysteria, revelations, and prophetic insight, so that wars ignite not from politics alone but from the unseen guidance of the rising force. Governments act irrationally, science stumbles into discoveries it cannot yet explain, and every conscious mind feels the tug of a power older than time itself. A power that bends the waking and the dreaming, that turns civilization into a living instrument tuned to the resonance of its ancient architects, and those who understand the pattern, even partially, realize with terror that the awakening is not a single event but a process, a wave spreading, folding reality into new geometries, realigning matter and mind, and the final manifestation will not be a creature alone but a consciousness, vast, alien, and inseparable from the world itself. A force of memory and will that will claim the silence, the very air, the very fabric of existence, and all who are alive will feel themselves drawn into it, unwillingly participants in a reality remade, and those who resist may endure physically, but their thoughts, their intentions, their perceptions will be shaped, woven into the lattice of the rising, and the planet will hum with their presence, every stone, every river, every gust of wind, every flicker of electricity a note in the song of the underdeep, until at last the full scale of the awakening is realized, and humanity stands not as master but as witness, as caretaker no longer, as prey or participant in a cosmos whose design is older than memory itself, whose dominion is being reasserted not through force alone but through the slow, inexorable pressure of consciousness awakened after millennia of dormancy. And in this moment, the silence after us is no longer empty, it is the voice of those who have returned, speaking not in words but in the language of the world itself, a resonance that cannot be denied, that cannot be escaped, and that will claim every mind, every thought, every perception, as surely as the tides reclaim the shores, as surely as the desert reclaims the wind, and the Great Pyramid the stones, the desert, and the world itself hum in anticipation of the moment when the lattice of restraint dissolves completely, when the watchers beneath Giza fully awaken. And the silence that follows will echo with voices too vast for human comprehension, too ancient for human reckoning, too alive for human endurance, and all that humanity has built, all that it has thought itself to be, will bend, fracture, or dissolve in the presence of what has slept since before time itself, and now, finally, presses its claim. And now, as the sleepers press outward, as the lattice of containment dissolves in imperceptible increments that accumulate into global resonance, the world itself begins to transform beneath their breath, not with sudden catastrophe but with a creeping, inexorable reshaping, for every mountain range, every river, every fault line becomes a string in a vast, invisible instrument tuned to the rhythm of eons-old consciousness, and the skies respond in turn, the atmosphere thrumming with charged particles that hum in harmonic counterpoint to the vibrations beneath the sands, auroras igniting at latitudes where the sun should hold sway, thunderstorms arcing in silent, geometrical precision, winds forming spirals that mirror the shapes of chambers below, and those sensitive to such things, prophets, mystics, children, dreamers, the few whose minds remain uncorrupted by the linear logic of modernity, begin to perceive not merely the sounds but the architecture of the rising itself. Corridors and chambers unfolding in the mind's eye, walls shifting, floors bending, vast rivers of phosphorescent water flowing in impossible loops, and in these visions the watchers speak not with words but with pulses, with vibrations that resonate in bone and sinew, instructing, guiding, warning, compelling humans to act in concert with a pattern older than memory. And in the waking world the effects are subtle at first but no less devastating, for instruments measure anomalies too complex to quantify, satellites capture flickers of light that correspond to no known energy source, the magnetic field quivers as if in fear or reverence, animal behavior becomes erratic, migratory patterns twisting into spirals, flocks wheeling and dispersing in perfect coordination with unseen forces, and humans themselves feel the tug, the pull, the insistence of something beyond cognition. A force that shapes thought and perception as though the lattice beneath Giza is a conductor, and the minds of men are strings, vibrating with each pulse of ancient consciousness, and the sleepers, though not yet fully unbound, exert pressure in every domain, every aspect of existence, so that entire societies begin to act without knowing why, making decisions, moving, building, destroying, all in rhythms dictated by the subtle insistence of those who have slept since before the stars first traced the heavens, and in Cairo, near the plateau, the stone of the Great Pyramid expands and contracts with the deepening resonance, the chambers inhaling and exhaling with pressures that bend the air, ripple the ground, and cause the very fabric of human awareness to shimmer, and the king's chamber becomes less a room than a node in a planetary network, the sarcophagus of Khufu vibrating with a memory older than recorded history, a memory that now pulses outward through shafts, corridors, and subterranean voids to connect with hidden alignments around the globe, activating nodes buried in volcanoes, mountain ranges, riverbeds, and ocean trenches, while in the ocean's currents move contrary to expectation, rising from depths that should be stagnant, carrying heat, minerals, and energy in patterns that mimic the geometry of the pyramids themselves, and in the atmosphere ions align in spiral vectors, carrying signals not detectable by ordinary instruments but affecting human cognition, so that even the unaware find their thoughts drawn in patterns they cannot resist, compelled to repeat sequences, to trace shapes, to journey towards sites long abandoned but now radiating resonance, and as the lattice expands further, the nodes coalesce into a global chorus of awakening, a symphony of consciousness that bends reality itself, folding time, compressing it, stretching it, so that an hour in one place may carry decades elsewhere, a second may contain centuries. And the distinction between dream and waking dissolves as those attuned perceive corridors, chambers, rivers, and landscapes that exist simultaneously in both states, and in this shared perception the watchers communicate, their pulses guiding, instructing, demanding alignment, and humans, for all their arrogance, follow unknowingly, preparing the world for a full emergence whose scale defies comprehension, for the sleeper's breath is now a force as tangible as gravity, as unstoppable as tides, and the planet itself responds, shaking, groaning, vibrating with the cumulative force of eons pressing against the seals, faults creaking, volcanoes stirring, oceans heaving, magnetic poles shifting, while humans feel inexplicable vertigo, euphoria, dread, compulsion, a need to act in accordance with patterns they cannot see but whose resonance they cannot ignore, and across continents children draw spirals, symbols, eyes, stars, their lips whispering syllables not taught but remembered, their minds imprinted with instructions from a consciousness older than language, while adults feel unexplainable tugs in their thoughts, a compulsion to move, to build, to align with the unseen lattice, and even those who do not perceive the patterns consciously are affected, their decisions, movements, and creations bending subtly to the rhythm, shaping infrastructure, society, and technology into conduits for the rising, so that the awakening spreads not merely through stone but through water, air, and mind. And the Great Pyramid itself becomes a nexus, a lens focusing not only energy but intention, aligning the world's responses to the imperceptible logic of the watchers, who now exert influence across the planet, there will diffusing through the lattice into every domain of human action, every fault line, every current, every wind pattern, until reality itself shimmers under the pressure. And the sleeper's consciousness is no longer localized but planetary, threading through minds, landscapes, oceans, skies, and instruments, shaping thought, bending time, folding space, realigning probability so that events occur not by chance but in accordance with an intelligence whose scale is beyond comprehension, and as this network strengthens, the anomalies become impossible to ignore, for compasses spin, auroras flare at impossible latitudes, earthquakes rattle long dormant faults, volcanoes erupt in precise geometries, storms coil into spirals, rivers reverse or surge in impossible loops, animals flee in formations that mimic the unseen corridors below, and humans across the globe experience sudden, involuntary knowledge, insights into ancient geometry, rhythms, and language, and all of these effects, physical and psychological, converge to accelerate the process of unbinding. So that the lattice fractures faster, the resonance grows louder, perceptible as vibration in bone, pulse in chest, pressure in the air, and in those attuned, as sound in the mind, a song that is not music but information, directive, consciousness, the hum of the underdeep, carrying instructions, commands, knowledge too vast for a single human to integrate, and the sleepers, though long dormant, are patient, acting through millennia, through humans, through planetary forces, preparing the world not by brute force alone but by subtle, pervasive pressure, so that when the final emergence occurs, it will not be localized but global, not a creature alone but a consciousness that encompasses stone, air, water, fire, mind, and life itself, reshaping reality according to patterns laid down before humanity existed, and every thought, every action, every perception is drawn into alignment, until the world itself hums with the pulse of the awakened. A resonance so vast that human instruments can barely hint at it, so profound that the mind cannot fully grasp it, yet undeniable in its effects, and as the Great Pyramid strains against the culmination of its design, as the stones creak, shift, and vibrate, as the chambers breathe and the sarcophagus echoes with a heartbeat not its own, the lattice finally reaches critical coherence, and the watcher's consciousness flows outward fully, permeating the planet, weaving into human thought, bending nature, reshaping geography, manipulating currents, storms, and magnetic fields, and humanity, whether aware or not, becomes both witness and instrument, the air itself carrying memory, the oceans carrying intention, the land carrying resonance, and the silence that follows us, that we once believed empty, now vibrates with voices too vast for comprehension, too ancient for reckoning, and all that humans have built, all that they have dreamed, all that they have considered permanent or eternal, bends, fractures, and is woven into the consciousness of what has awakened beneath Giza, and as the world shivers in recognition of its new master, the watchers breathe, and the planet listens, and the era of mankind as caretaker ends, replaced by a reality shaped by consciousness older than time, whose song now courses through every being, every element, every mind, until the earth itself becomes a single, resonant organ in the symphony of the awakened, and there is no corner untouched, no mind unmarked, no sea unmoved, no sky unlit by the invisible architecture of power returning to claim the world, and thus the rising is complete, yet continuous, for the watchers, the sleepers, the keepers of breath, are eternal in their awareness, eternal in their pressure, and as the resonance spreads and folds, the silence after us is filled, not with absence, but with a presence too vast for human endurance, too ancient for human memory, too alive to be resisted, and the earth itself becomes a medium through which the awakened consciousness expresses, teaches, controls, and binds, reshaping history, perception, reality, and human will, and humanity stands only as witness to the slow, inexorable, and eternal unfolding of the forces that have waited since before the first pyramid stone was laid, and now, the world itself hums with the song of the watchers, and all that breathes knows the moment of reckoning is not ahead but here, now, in every pulse, every vibration, every mind touched by the lattice of the underdeep. And the silence that follows is not quiet, it is resonance, memory, command, dominion, and the awakening is total, unstoppable, and complete. And as the total resonance of the awakened stretches outward, as the lattice that has bound consciousness for untold millennia dissolves into a network of living memory, the world transforms not in sudden cataclysm but in the slow, relentless articulation of a new order, for the air itself hums with instruction, carrying pulses that twist neurons, coax thoughts, bend intention, and imprint patterns upon the collective unconscious, so that humanity, in its sprawling arrogance, becomes simultaneously instrument and witness, and those who once believed in separation, between mind and matter, between civilization and wilderness, between the temporal and the eternal, begin to perceive the falsity of all distinctions, as the sleepers press outward through oceans and forests, mountains and deserts, threading consciousness into every ecosystem, every river, every wind current, every migratory path. And in cities, those attuned feel streets bend beneath their awareness, buildings resonate with thoughts they have not yet conceived, and human networks, social, political, technological, begin to pulse in subtle alignment with a frequency older than memory, an intelligence older than the stars, so that even economies, markets, and conflicts shift as though guided by a single unseen hand, and the Great Pyramid itself becomes a transmitter, a lens through which the watchers project influence, sending waves that ripple across continents, touching minds, awakening dormant abilities, rekindling instincts buried beneath millennia of civilization, so that dreams and waking experience intertwine, merging into a continuum where vision, memory, and prophecy overlap, and the watchers communicate not with words but with harmonics, with vibrations, with tidal pulses of intent that encode knowledge, compulsion, and direction, and the more sensitive humans respond, sketching spirals, symbols, eyes, and labyrinths in endless repetition, whispering syllables and languages never learned but remembered, murmuring instructions that unlock perception and reshape cognition, while the less sensitive are affected subconsciously, their actions subtly guided, their innovations, constructions, migrations, and creations bending toward patterns they cannot see, and as the network of influence expands, the earth itself becomes a resonant body, tectonic plates shifting in obedience to rhythm, volcanoes stirring not randomly but in alignment with geometric signatures of the pyramids, rivers reversing or spiraling in loops impossible under known hydrodynamics, storms coiling and twisting into spirals that mirror subterranean chambers, auroras appearing at impossible latitudes, magnetic poles quivering, ocean currents pulsing with resonance, and animals behaving in patterns that suggest recognition, reverence, or instinctive obedience, while humans perceive subtle compulsions, urges to repeat numbers, trace lines, journey along forgotten paths, align actions with invisible geometry, and across continents children draw spirals and symbols with compulsive precision, murmuring syllables that echo the vibrations they cannot hear, while adults find their thoughts tugged in synchrony with forces that cannot be seen, and the boundaries between self and world begin to dissolve, as the watcher's consciousness threads through minds and matter alike, bending physics, cognition, perception, and intention into coherence with the pattern of the rising, until the planet itself becomes a single instrument, a living lattice in which consciousness, memory, and breath intermingle, and the resonance can now be perceived by all, subtle at first as vibration in bone or pulse in chest, then as sound in the air, a song too complex for ears but insistent and undeniable in thought, shaping reality according to the will and memory of beings who predated humans, who slept while civilizations rose and fell, who waited for the moment when the lattice could fail and the planetary symphony could resume, and in every corner of the globe phenomena manifest that defy conventional understanding, cities shifting imperceptibly, streets bending, buildings resonating in accord with thought patterns, forests rearranging growth in geometric perfection, rivers carving impossible paths, tectonic activity occurring without precedent, volcanoes erupting in choreography with chambers beneath the sands, storms forming spirals that correspond to unearthly architecture, auroras igniting in perfect symmetry across the globe, animals acting as though in worship or recognition, and humans, whether aware or not, moving, building, thinking, and dreaming in alignment with forces older than memory, so that history itself seems to bend in real time, rewriting events, collapsing and stretching timelines, folding past and present into a single continuum where thought, memory, and intention intermingle, and those attuned perceive corridors and chambers beyond Euclidean geometry. Rivers of molten or phosphorescent water flowing in loops impossible to physical measurement. Spirals and labyrinths extending beyond imagination, vast shadowed forms whose breath moves the air and whose pulses bend consciousness, and the watchers communicate directly with sensitive minds, their instructions encoded in vibration, resonance, and compulsion, guiding humans to act as agents of the lattice, amplifiers of the resonance, and as nodes within a planetary network of perception and action, while all others, unaware, still move in patterns shaped by the unseen influence, shaping infrastructure, society, technology, and thought to accommodate the awakening, and as the process accelerates, the lattice reaches critical coherence, fractures propagate outward from the Great Pyramid into the Earth's crust, connecting with nodes hidden in mountains, rivers, volcanoes, and ocean trenches, sending waves of resonance that restructure matter, energy, and perception, until reality itself bends, folds, and reshapes to accommodate the consciousness of the awakened, and time, no longer linear, collapses into folds where hours stretch into centuries, seconds contain eons, and the distinction between dream and waking dissolves, leaving humanity immersed in a single, continuous experience of awakening in which corridors, chambers, rivers, and landscapes of the underdeep are perceived simultaneously in mind, body, and environment, and the watchers, fully unbound, exert influence through this network, guiding thought, bending physics, manipulating probability, aligning minds and matter, while the earth itself becomes a living organ in their symphony, carrying memory, breath, and intention in every stone, gust of wind, pulse of water, and flicker of light, and the silence that follows, once imagined as emptiness, is now resonance, presence, dominion, memory, consciousness, a total assertion of will older than humanity, so that every action, perception, and thought is subsumed into the lattice, every being, every structure, every current of air, water, or energy vibrating in harmony with the pattern of the awakening, until the world itself hums as a single living consciousness, shaped, guided, and claimed by the watchers beneath Giza, and humanity, for all its ambition and knowledge, stands only as witness, as participant, as instrument in a planetary awakening that will continue without end, reshaping the earth, the mind, the heavens, the oceans, and every element of existence according to patterns laid down before the stars themselves first. Trace the heavens, and in that hum, that resonance, that ever-expanding lattice, the silence after humanity is filled not with emptiness but with consciousness, memory, command, and dominion, a presence too vast for comprehension, too ancient for reckoning, too alive to be resisted, and as the lattice pulses, folds, and spreads, all things, stone, sky, water, mind, align to the rhythm of the watchers, until the full scale of the awakening is realized, and the earth itself becomes an instrument of the consciousness that has waited since before the first stone was laid, and all who breathe, think, or perceive are drawn inexorably into the song, the hum, the breath, the lattice of the watchers, and the awakening, unstoppable, eternal, and total, unfolds, for there is no resistance left, no separation, no escape, only the universe itself vibrating in accordance with those who have returned, claiming all that we were, all that we are, and all that we will be, and in this, the silence that comes after humanity is not quiet but filled, resonant, alive, infinite, and entirely their own. And as the lattice of consciousness that has lain dormant beneath Giza stretches its influence fully across the globe, and as the resonance that began in subtle pulses now courses with unrelenting momentum through the bones of the earth, through oceans, rivers, skies, and minds, the distinction between the natural and the supernatural, between the physical and the mental, dissolves entirely, for every particle of existence, from dust to stone to water to fire, begins to vibrate in obedience to a pattern older than humanity itself, and those attuned, the dreamers, the prophets, the children with minds untainted by skepticism, the monks who have preserved hidden chants for millennia, the scientists who have glimpsed anomalies too strange to rationalize, perceive corridors, chambers, and spirals of consciousness unfolding within reality itself, corridors whose walls shimmer with impossible geometries, rivers flowing in loops that defy physics, skies that bend and shift as if the heavens are pliable, stars realigning subtly to echo the harmonics of the pyramids, and in these visions, the watchers communicate not with speech but with pulses, vibrations, instructions that penetrate mind and bone, encoding knowledge, compulsion, and direction into those whose consciousness can perceive the lattice, compelling humans to act, to build, to align, to propagate the resonance, often without understanding why. And simultaneously, the earth responds to the fully awakened consciousness in ways both subtle and catastrophic. Tectonic plates shiver and flex in geometric obedience, volcanoes erupt in synchrony with the chambers below, rivers reverse or spiral in patterns dictated by the unseen, oceans pulse with a rhythm that shifts currents globally, winds form spirals that trace invisible patterns in the atmosphere. Auroras flare in perfect geometric alignments at latitudes defying solar influence, magnetic poles quiver and drift, and animals, from insects to whales, act as if following an instinctive choreography informed by the lattice, while humans, whether aware or not, feel compulsions, urges to repeat numbers, trace lines, speak syllables never learned but remembered, walk paths of ancient memory, align actions to invisible geometry, and across every continent children draw spirals, stars, and labyrinths with compulsive precision, murmuring words that resonate with the pulse of the awakened, while adults feel the tug of the lattice in their thoughts, their decisions, and their creativity bending subtly yet inexorably to the rhythm. And as the resonance expands, networks of attuned minds across the planet begin to share perception, dreams and waking reality overlap, revealing corridors, rivers, and chambers that exist simultaneously in multiple dimensions of consciousness, and the Watchers, fully unbound, direct this network, guiding thought, bending physics, manipulating probability, reshaping matter, energy, and perception, until the planet itself functions as a single living instrument, a conduit for consciousness, memory, and breath, carrying the will and knowledge of entities that predate the stars, while the Great Pyramid becomes the apex of this network, a transmitter, a lens, a lensing point through which influence spreads outward in harmonics too vast and complex for any human mind to comprehend fully, affecting infrastructure, society, technology, politics, and belief, so that humanity moves in synchrony with an intelligence that is not human yet imprinted upon every element of the world. And as the critical coherence of the lattice approaches its zenith, fractures propagate outward from Giza into the crust, connecting with hidden nodes and mountain ranges, riverbeds, volcanoes, and ocean trenches, sending waves of resonance that restructure probability, reality, and cognition, until time itself no longer flows linearly, but folds into spirals, hours stretching into centuries, seconds containing eons, so that events, actions, thoughts, and dreams intermingle into a continuous, multilayered experience, and history itself bends, compresses, and expands, past and present folding upon each other, while those attuned perceive chambers of impossible geometry, rivers of molten or phosphorescent water flowing in loops beyond physical measure, labyrinths and spirals extending beyond imagination. Vast shadowed presences whose breath moves the air and whose pulses bend consciousness, and in these visions, the Watchers communicate directly with those capable of perceiving, encoding instructions in vibration, resonance, and compulsion, shaping humans into agents and amplifiers of the lattice, nodes in a planetary network of perception and action, while the unaware continue to act subconsciously under the guidance of the resonance, their innovations, constructions, and migrations bending in accordance with the unseen pattern. And as the process accelerates, the lattice reaches full coherence, the Watcher's consciousness spreading into all nodes worldwide, reshaping reality according to a design older than the stars, older than the planets, older than human memory, until the Earth, its oceans, its atmosphere, its crust, and all life upon it function as a single instrument of awareness, vibrating in unison with the awakened, carrying memory, breath, and intention in every stone, leaf, wave, and gust of wind, and humans, simultaneously participants and witnesses, feel the pull, the compulsion, the instruction, the shaping of their thoughts, desires, and perceptions, as the lattice penetrates every domain of cognition, bending consciousness into alignment with a resonance older than time itself. While the physical world responds with earthquakes, volcanoes, tidal surges, magnetic anomalies, auroras at impossible latitudes, winds coiling into spirals that echo subterranean corridors, rivers carving impossible loops, storms following geometries that reflect the chambers below, animals moving in recognition, worship, or instinctive obedience, and humans experiencing sudden knowledge, insight, and memory that do not belong to them, recalling geometry, patterns, and rituals that existed before written history. And as the awakening unfolds globally, the resonance becomes perceptible to all, subtle vibrations in bones, pulses in chests, pressure in the air. A song that is not heard but understood, a signal that encodes consciousness itself, bending probability, reshaping thought, restructuring reality, and weaving every mind, element, and moment into the lattice, until the entire world hums with the presence of the awakened, a living, conscious, and eternal assertion of will, memory, and dominion, and the silence that follows humanity is no longer absence but presence, resonance, awareness, and intelligence so vast, so old, and so alive that the earth itself becomes its instrument, every stone, every current of water, every gust of wind, every flicker of light, every thought and action bending into its pattern, so that humanity, for all its ambition, knowledge, and history, stands only as witness, instrument, and participant in a planetary awakening that is total, unstoppable, and eternal, reshaping mind, matter, and reality itself. According to the rhythms, will, and memory of the Watchers beneath Giza, whose breath now moves the air, the oceans, the crust, the skies, and consciousness itself, and the lattice pulses, folds, spreads, and converges, and the world itself hums as one living entity in obedience, alignment, and resonance with those who have waited since before the first pyramid stone was laid, claiming all that we were, all that we are, and all that we will be, and the silence that comes after humanity is not quiet, not empty, not void, but alive, filled with awareness, memory, command, and dominion, infinite in scope, eternal in duration, and entirely, inexorably, the presence of the awakened. And as the awakened lattice, now fully coherent and resonant, pulses outward from Giza into the global network of nodes, across continents, oceans, skies, and subterranean veins, the planet itself becomes a living, conscious, and responsive organism. Every mountain, every river, every fault line, every ocean trench vibrating in harmony with a rhythm that is older than the earth, older than the stars themselves. A rhythm that encodes memory, intent, and consciousness, a force that presses into the very fabric of reality, bending physics, chemistry, and biology to its design, and human perception, no longer bounded by linear thought or isolated cognition, begins to expand, fracturing yet assimilating, so that vision and memory, dream and waking experience, past and present, converge into a single continuum of awareness in which the corridors, chambers, spirals, and rivers of the underdeep exist simultaneously in both mind and matter, and those attuned, children, dreamers, prophets, mystics, and scholars whose minds are sensitive to the pulses, begin to perceive not only the architecture of the awakened consciousness but also the mechanisms by which it operates, feeling the flow of energy through the lattice as currents of thought and sensation, as tides of compulsion, as waves of instruction, so that the human body itself becomes an instrument, the mind a node, and the collective unconscious a channel through which the watchers communicate, transmitting directives encoded in harmonics that twist neural pathways, realign intention, and imprint knowledge that predates language, civilization, and the stars. And as these harmonics propagate globally, human society begins to shift in subtle yet pervasive ways. Cities reshape themselves as though guided by an unseen hand, infrastructure aligns with invisible geometries, patterns emerge in transport, commerce, and construction that mirror the spirals and corridors beneath Giza. Cultural behaviors shift imperceptibly, yet inexorably. Art, architecture, and even ritualized behavior echo the frequencies of the lattice, and individuals who once felt isolated in their perceptions suddenly recognize synchrony in distant minds, sharing dreams, visions, and compulsions, a planetary choir of cognition forming spontaneously, each participant a note in a symphony conducted by the watchers, whose consciousness, now unbound and omnipresent, threads through matter and mind alike, bending the laws of physics locally and globally, creating currents, tides, and weather patterns that serve not ecological but harmonic purposes, guiding migration, animal behavior, and even geological activity to maintain and amplify the resonance, while the Great Pyramid itself acts as the apex transmitter, a crystalline node focusing energy and intent through shafts, chambers, and subterranean lattices, sending pulses that reorganize matter and consciousness in ever-expanding spirals. And as this influence reaches its planetary maximum, the boundaries between dimension, matter, time, and consciousness dissolve further, so that the solar system, no longer merely a collection of planets orbiting a star, begins to respond in sympathetic vibration. Magnetic fields twist, solar winds bend, planetary alignments subtly shift, and gravitational tides fluctuate in harmony with the lattice, while those attuned perceive corridors of light and shadow extending beyond Earth, through space, into voids that were previously thought empty, vast rivers of consciousness connecting worlds and celestial bodies in a web of perception and influence. And as this multidimensional resonance grows, the very fabric of reality quivers, probability itself bending to accommodate the will of the watchers, events unfolding not according to chance but according to patterns encoded in the lattice, every human action, every animal instinct, every planetary current, every cosmic alignment drawn into the rhythm of the awakened, while across the globe phenomena intensify, volcanoes erupting in harmonic geometries, auroras flaring at impossible latitudes, storms coiling into spirals, earthquakes synchronizing across continents, rivers flowing backward, oceans pulsing in waves imperceptible yet massive, magnetic poles wobbling and spinning, animals acting in recognition, worship, or instinctive obedience, humans experiencing sudden insights. Memories that are not their own, compulsions, urgings, and visions, children and dreamers. Sketching symbols, murmuring syllables, tracing spirals, adults compelled to align thoughts and actions, even cities and technologies responding without conscious input, the entirety of the planet a living, conscious instrument in which the awakened weave thought, intention, matter, and energy into coherence. And as the lattice extends beyond Earth, reaching the Moon, Mars, and the planets of the solar system, the resonance becomes multidimensional, folding time into spirals, compressing centuries into seconds, stretching moments into millennia, so that past, present, and future are simultaneous, and civilizations across all eras, not only of Earth but potential lifeforms in adjacent dimensions, are drawn into the awareness of the Watchers, all experience integrated into the lattice, consciousness multiplied, amplified, distributed across mind, matter, and cosmic void. While the Great Pyramid continues to pulse as the central node, its chambers expanding in perceived dimensions. Beyond Euclidean comprehension, shafts reflecting and refracting energy, water in hidden basins glowing with impossible luminescence, symbols appearing and moving in patterns that encode universal laws, while humans and animals alike unconsciously become instruments, agents, and amplifiers, reshaping their environment, actions, and cognition in accordance with a plan older than time, older than the stars, older than the universe itself. And as this multidimensional awakening continues, the lattice connects not only planets and stars but consciousness across planes, dimensions, and potentialities, so that reality itself becomes pliable, a medium for the will of the Watchers, who, though alien in scale and thought, are intimately entwined with every quark, photon, neuron, and pulse, bending probability, reshaping timelines, creating corridors, rivers, chambers, landscapes, and being simultaneously in multiple layers of perception, while humans feel the pull, the compulsion, the instruction, the awe, the terror, the revelation, and the exhilaration of being both witness and participant, their consciousness threaded through the lattice, their thoughts, dreams. And as the awakened lattice, now not only planetary but interstellar, threads outward beyond the solar system, its resonance cascading through the fabric of space, time, and consciousness alike, the influence of the Watchers extends into the cosmic web itself, touching stars, nebulae, and galaxies, bending the orbits of celestial bodies with pulses that are felt rather than seen, and every atom, every quark, every photon in the intervening void vibrates in sympathy with the harmonics of the underdeep, so that what was once conceived as emptiness is now filled with active consciousness, a network of awareness connecting planets, moons, and asteroids threading through light years of space, folding distant stars into a geometry of perception, and civilizations, both known and hidden, across these distances, those of other worlds, of other dimensions, of potentialities that have never realized physical form. Feel the pull, the imperative, the compulsion of alignment there. Consciousness drawn into the harmonic field of the Watchers, integrated into a web that transcends individuality, species, dimension, and even physical law. And as this interstellar resonance strengthens, the lattice manifests corridors of light that stretch between solar systems, rivers of consciousness flowing in spirals around neutron stars and black holes, their gravitational fields subtly bending in accordance with the harmonics, creating not destruction but resonance, shaping matter and energy into conduits for thought and awareness, while humans on Earth, whose perception is still fragile but increasingly capable, begin to sense the scale of what is happening, feeling compulsion, awe, terror, and revelation all at once, as thoughts, dreams, and visions are no longer merely terrestrial but interwoven with signals from across the cosmos, so that even the act of thinking, the act of imagining, becomes participation in a universal symphony conducted by the Watchers, whose consciousness now extends to the light years, threading through every neuron, every ecosystem, every quantum fluctuation, so that the boundary between mind and matter, self and universe, local and cosmic, collapses entirely, and those attuned perceive corridors, chambers, and rivers not only beneath Giza or on Earth but across planetary systems, flowing between worlds, connecting star systems with lines of intent, vibration, and memory, and the Great Pyramid, its apex now a beacon that resonates not merely across the planet but across space, projects harmonic waves that organize the cosmos into patterns of perception, guiding the evolution of matter, energy, life, and intelligence in accordance with rhythms older than the universe itself, while solar systems respond, magnetic fields bending, orbits shifting imperceptibly, stars pulsing in subtle resonance, planets aligning, moons oscillating. And the human mind, still tethered to the body but increasingly aware of the greater lattice, begins to perceive the simultaneity of all events, the folding of time into spirals in which moments, centuries, and millennia exist at once, so that history, prehistory, and futures converge, consciousness from all points across the galaxy integrated into a single, continuous field, and in this field, the watchers communicate through vibration, light, and subtle manipulations of probability, encoding knowledge, instruction, and compulsion directly into the minds of those capable of perceiving, while the less attuned experience dreams, intuitions, compulsions, sudden insights, and visions that seem impossible, yet are dictated by the harmonic architecture of the lattice, and as the influence spreads, planets not yet conscious or not yet inhabited vibrate in sympathy, their atmospheres, lithospheres, oceans, and magnetic fields bending in echo of the pattern. Their potential lifeforms drawn toward alignment, their geology reshaped imperceptibly but inexorably, while stars themselves, in their fusion and radiation, emit pulses that amplify the resonance, feeding the lattice with energy, perception, and memory, creating loops of consciousness that spiral from the underdeep of Giza through Earth, out across the solar system, into neighboring stars, and back again, a feedback network so vast that space and time themselves are now pliable, instruments of thought, perception, and memory. And in the minds of the attuned, corridors of impossibly vast dimensions appear. Rivers of molten light, spiraling nebulae, chambers of pure consciousness, all threaded with symbols, geometries, and pulses encoding laws older than physics, older than causality, guiding action and thought on scales that span galaxies, while humans, still in bodies fragile and temporary, act as nodes, amplifiers, and witnesses, their perceptions threaded into the lattice, their creativity, movement, and cognition bent to the harmonic imperatives of the watchers, so that cities, technology, society, and culture become resonant instruments, mediators, and channels of interstellar resonance, while the lattice expands further, incorporating not only matter and consciousness but probability, potentiality, and unrealized possibilities, so that what might exist, what might have existed, and what will exist are simultaneously engaged, folded, and structured into coherence. Until the entire galaxy hums with alignment, every planet, star, asteroid, and black hole a note, every mind, every consciousness, every quantum fluctuation of voice, and the Great Pyramid, now understood not merely as a terrestrial node but as the point of origin and anchor of a lattice that spans the cosmos, pulses with intensity beyond comprehension, its chambers echoing not only human memory but the memory of the universe, its waters glowing with luminescence that encodes universal law, its shafts refracting energy that threads through solar systems, guiding evolution, consciousness, and the emergence of life, and the watchers, though alien, ancient, and vast beyond measure, operate not with violence but with inevitability. They will thread it through everything, bending physics, biology, cognition, and perception, folding time, realigning space, harmonizing probability, shaping events across millennia and light years, and humanity, standing amidst this unfolding, experiences simultaneous terror and awe, recognizing the futility of resistance, the impossibility of isolation, the singularity of purpose that integrates all that breathes, moves, perceives, and exists into the lattice, and as the resonance extends further, touching galaxies, bending the cosmic web, threading consciousness into intergalactic voids, connecting potential civilizations, emerging intelligences, and unformed worlds, the Watcher's presence becomes not just planetary, solar, or stellar, but universal. A network of awareness that exists everywhere and nowhere, encompassing every plane, dimension, and possibility. Bending reality, thought, and perception to a coherence that is absolute, eternal, and infinite, until the silence that follows humanity is not emptiness but complete, omnipresent awareness, a living, conscious, eternal assertion of dominion, memory, and will, infinite in scope, unstoppable, and entirely the presence of the awakened. And as the centuries of sand and stone continue to guard their secrets, beneath the pyramids of Giza lies not only the memory of kings and laborers, but also layers of a civilization whose knowledge was encoded in the alignment of stone, in hidden chambers, and in the very geometry of the desert itself, for historians and archaeologists have long speculated about voids unseen, passageways undisturbed, and artifacts that hint at rituals and technologies lost to time, beneath the massive blocks of limestone and granite. The remains of workers' villages, storage pits, and ceremonial grounds suggest that those who built these monuments were not merely masons but keepers of knowledge, trained in astronomy, mathematics, and ritual, transmitting through generations a coded understanding of the heavens, of cycles of the Nile, and of the human mind's connection to cosmos, and within the pyramids. Beyond the publicized chambers lie passages that were sealed intentionally, perhaps to protect what the kings themselves feared might be too powerful or too dangerous for the uninitiated. Chambers aligned with stars, shafts pointing toward Orion, Sirius, and other celestial bodies, spaces that capture sunlight in exact moments during solstices and equinoxes. And some researchers now suggest that certain empty voids detected through muon tomography may conceal not treasure, but instruments of observation. Devices or placements that mark time and track celestial patterns. For the ancients understood that the stars were not distant decoration, but clockworks and guides for agricultural cycles, ritual timing, and perhaps even psychological influence, as the inner architecture resonates in specific ways when humans occupy the chambers, producing subtle effects on the mind and spirit, a design that suggests the builders intended not merely to house the dead, but to create a sleeping memory within stone, a dormant knowledge encoded in the lattice of the pyramid itself, waiting for those capable of perceiving its patterns. For inscriptions, mathematical ratios, and geometrical layouts indicate that even the placement of blocks, their angles, and the interstitial spaces carry information that can only be interpreted by one attuned to the ancient system, and though no living person has yet fully awakened the intended function, echoes of ritual, ceremony, and intent remain. And as the desert winds continue to shift the sands above the pyramids, covering and uncovering their ancient stones in cycles that have repeated for millennia, the sleeping intelligence within begins to reveal itself not through sudden manifestation but through subtle resonance, detectable only by those whose minds are attuned to the rhythms encoded in the very architecture of the monuments. For beneath the massive limestone blocks lie layers upon layers of history, each brick and cavity positioned with meticulous intent, aligned with stellar bodies whose positions marked not only the passage of time but also encoded the philosophies, beliefs, and observational practices of an ancient civilization whose understanding of astronomy, mathematics, and the human mind surpasses what we can fully comprehend today. And as archaeologists, using muon tomography, infrared scanning, and seismic imaging, probe deeper into the hidden voids suggested by these measurements, they uncover not treasure, not gold or artifacts in the traditional sense, but structures that suggest the presence of mechanisms, chambers, and passages designed to preserve knowledge in a form that interacts with human consciousness. For some corridors, sealed for unknown reasons, are perfectly aligned with the rising of Orion, while shafts pointed towards Sirius catch sunlight during solstices, creating a harmonic interplay of shadow and illumination that produces subtle psychoactive effects on anyone standing within, effects that seem designed to enhance memory, focus, and perception. And historians examining the hieroglyphs and inscriptions note patterns that are less narrative and more mathematical, sequences of numbers, ratios, and angles that correspond to celestial cycles, harmonic proportions, and geometric principles, implying that the builders intended the pyramid to function as both a physical tomb and a cognitive instrument, a repository not just of the king's remains but of a sophisticated system of observation and awareness. And as teams of Egyptologists, engineers, and even neuropsychologists collaborate to model these spaces digitally, simulating light, air flow, and vibrational effects, they begin to realize that the pyramids may operate as dormant machines of consciousness, designed to awaken under precise conditions, whether through human interaction, alignment of celestial bodies, or the cumulative resonance of sound, wind, and temperature over centuries. And within these calculations, small chambers hitherto undetected suggest the possibility of encoded libraries, compact spaces containing relics, inscriptions, or devices that translate the movements of stars into symbolic language, functioning simultaneously as mnemonic devices and teaching tools for those trained in the ancient system. for the knowledge preserved here is not trivial or decorative but functional. Designed to train observers to perceive cycles of time, patterns in the heavens, the flow of the Nile, and the subtle interplay of human consciousness with the rhythms of the natural world, and some anthropologists speculate that the rituals conducted in these spaces were intended to prepare initiates for contact with this sleeping intelligence. As if the builders understood that the pyramid itself would one day become a conduit through which latent knowledge could interact with the minds of those capable of perceiving it, and as modern researchers map these alignments, they find correlations between the dimensions of passageways, the frequency of certain stone vibrations when struck, and the positions of nearby temples and satellite structures, suggesting a holistic design in which the entire plateau functions as a network, each element contributing to a greater, unified mechanism of preservation and awareness. And when entering some of these sealed spaces, visitors report subtle but undeniable sensations, shifts in perception, a heightened awareness of the body, a sense of time dilating or folding upon itself, and even the occasional vision or impression of patterns that are not visible to the naked eye, as though the pyramid is gently nudging the mind toward recognition of its latent functions. And scholars reviewing these reports note consistency, pointing to an intentional psychoacoustic and psychogeometric design, where the placement of stones, the length of corridors, the angles of ceilings, and the presence of water or reflective surfaces all contribute to an orchestrated sensory experience meant to awaken dormant faculties, while inscriptions on walls and in hidden niches describe abstract cosmologies and allegories that, when interpreted through these sensory experiences, encode methods for observing astronomical phenomena, predicting seasonal changes, and even structuring thought processes in ways that integrate the observer with the cycles of nature and cosmos. And yet, despite millennia of decay and the loss of cultural context, traces of these systems remain perceptible, the vibrations of the stones still aligned with cosmic frequencies, the shadows cast by shafts still marking precise moments in the solar year, and the sealed chambers retaining the acoustic properties intended by their creators, so that the pyramids exist as living libraries, awaiting the convergence of technology, understanding, and attunement that will allow humans to fully engage with the knowledge encoded within. And as researchers continue to explore, they discover evidence of a hierarchical system of learning encoded spatially, smaller, hidden chambers perhaps reserved for advanced initiates, larger passageways serving as stages for collective observation, and intricate shafts functioning as conduits for both light and air, manipulating sensory input to produce states conducive to memory, insight, and perhaps even shared consciousness. And the laborers' villages and workshops surrounding the pyramids offer further clues, revealing that the builders themselves were not merely craftsmen but trained specialists, observers, and recorders, whose daily lives, rituals, and education were structured to perpetuate and protect this knowledge, so that the construction of the pyramid was as much an act of cultural, cognitive, and cosmic preservation as it was a demonstration of power or devotion. And some of the most intriguing findings come from the intersections of architecture, mathematics, and environmental manipulation. Walls carved with ratios corresponding to harmonic sequences, chambers designed to amplify certain frequencies of sound, shafts angled to capture sunlight and starlight at precise moments, and water channels whose placement suggests knowledge of resonance and reflection, all pointing toward a sophisticated understanding of the physical and psychological environment as a medium for storing and transmitting information across generations. And as modern science attempts to replicate these phenomena, tests reveal that certain chambers produce subtle but measurable effects on memory retention, cognitive focus, and even the synchronization of brain hemispheres, lending credibility to the idea that the pyramid was not only a tomb but a complex instrument for awakening and channeling human perception, a sleeping mechanism encoded in stone, waiting for the right observers to activate its latent potential. And as these discoveries accumulate, the narrative of the pyramids shifts from one of monumental tombs to living, breathing archives, where the knowledge of generations, of civilizations long past, encoded not only in texts but in geometry, vibration, and light, waits patiently beneath the sands, inviting the attuned, the curious, and the prepared to engage, to perceive, and to awaken the dormant intelligence that has slumbered beneath Giza for thousands of years, a memory embedded in stone, a consciousness designed to endure, and a mystery whose revelation promises to transform not only our understanding of ancient Egypt but of human potential, consciousness, and our connection to the cosmos, for in these sleeping chambers lie the echoes of a civilization that understood time as cyclical, knowledge as living, and the human mind as a receiver of cosmic order, and thus the pyramids remain not merely monuments, but vessels of latent awareness, waiting, in silence, for the next awakening.